The biggest threat to our democracy is sitting in the Oval Office. Our president's a disturbed person.
You're a man with 3 Pulitzer Prizes. These are strong words from you.
He is a disgusting human being. Donald Trump had more scandals this week, and I think it's only Tuesday, than Obama had in 8 years. He will destroy our institutions.
You are fake news.
Turns out a lot of people want trusted news. And now Facebook is really under the gun. Their platform was abused. And it was abused because they're more interested in clicks than facts, and they are now paying a huge price for it. The faster the world gets, Brian, the more everything that is old and slow matters more than ever. I feel like right now is a moment where people are looking more than ever for navigators they can trust. It's the real buzz that keeps me going.
They say that the human race is doomed, that we have lost touch with our true nature, that the media has corrupted us, and that the planet has no future. I disagree. I believe that humanity is full of hope, and that our salvation lies within each one of us. My name is Brian Rose, and my job is to listen, the oldest method of learning known to man. Each week I seek out individuals that are changing the world, people who are living and thinking in a different way. Their stories will challenge your beliefs, make you question your choices, and perhaps inspire you to change. I never planned on doing any of this, but now I can't stop. Join me on this mission and make humanity something we can all be proud of.
It's time for you to man up, to once and for all tell your mind who the fuck is boss. I need a fucking answer. What's it gonna be?
I don't know what it is about this fucking sport, but it attracts people that really need to do deep work on themselves.
I failed in this city. All these bad memories. I never really felt like I gave a fuck about me or my life. I almost killed myself, like.
Think about something that is going to drive you when it really hurts. Some kind of demon you want to fight.
This is not Pussy Man, this is Iron Man. Under pressure reveals true character. What are you gonna do? You're gonna be in Chattanooga May 20th or what?
Thomas Friedman is a journalist. That means a guy that's on the ground, reporting and curating the news that's really happening. He's a trusted source. For the past 30 years, he's been in places like Beirut and Israel. He's advised the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And he's written books like The World is Flat. And in this day and age of Facebook news and fake news, we're coming back to sources like this. He's been writing for the New York Times for nearly 30 years. His column goes out to 20 million people, and it was a real honor having him on the show. He had some hard-hitting things to say about President Trump and the code red that he said is happening right now when he refuses to investigate Russian meddling in US elections. He talked about what Facebook is going to do and the future of what he does as a journalist. I was super excited to have Thomas down. I've been reading his stuff for 10 plus years, and he's got an amazing perspective and real gravitas when he talks. I know you're going to love this episode. And I also know you're going to love the London Real Academy. Inside, we're kicking off for the Business Accelerator. This is how to turn your passion into a business, just like I did with London Real. And here's a little more about that. London Real doesn't stop when the conversation ends. You see, that's when we get started. Because everything begins with a thought, and then comes the action.
The London Real Academy is our global transformation platform. Here we bring together thousands of students from over 75 countries. Whether you want to build a profitable business from your passion, or learn to speak to inspire, or broadcast yourself with your very own podcast, or accelerate your life to become a high-performance person, we have the online accountability course and personal mentoring program that will make your dream a reality. Join us, and we'll take your life to the next level, together. Our next accelerator course is starting soon.
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Thomas Friedman, the internationally renowned author, reporter, and New York Times columnist. Your journalistic career spanned 4 decades with extensive writings on foreign affairs, global trade, the Middle East, globalization, and environmental issues. You're the recipient of 3 Pulitzer Prizes and the author of 7 best-selling books, including From Beirut to Jerusalem, The World is Flat, A Brief History of the 21st Century, one of my favorites, and the recently released Thank You for Being Late, An Optimist Guide to Thriving in the Age of Accelerations. You've also interviewed, some say advised, President Barack Obama. Thomas, welcome to London Real.
Great to be here, Brian. Thanks so much.
It's great to have you here. I'm curious, when you're taking that plane and coming into Heathrow and you're looking down at London, what are some of the memories that come back or the thoughts you have of being in this country or being back in this country?
Well, I never forget my first night here. I was a Marshall Scholar, so I was educated here, my postgraduate education, at first the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and then at Oxford, where I ultimately got my master's degree, MPhil degree in Middle East Studies from St. Anthony's. So I came here for the first time in the fall of 1975 as a Marshall Scholar, and the first night I was here, went to a play with a group of other Marshall Scholars, A Little Night Music. And so whenever I arrive in London, I think of send in the clowns, there'll always be clowns. You know, it's, I never forget that. It was in the Strand. And I was married here. Met my wife here, although she's from Des Moines, Iowa, so I had to come all the way over from, Minnesota boy, had to come all the way over from the States to meet a girl from Des Moines. I started my career here on Fleet Street. Got my graduate degree here, met so many friends here. I love London, I love the UK. I'm deeply grateful that my graduate education was paid for, courtesy of the British taxpayers, because I'm a Marshall Scholar, which was established in gratitude for the Marshall Plan. And this is a second home for me.
Wow. And Fleet Street back then, what was that like?
Well, you know, in those days I started at United Press International. UPI really no longer exists. The other wire service, there was AP, UPI, Reuters, basically. And started on one of those, that typewriter there, on Fleet Street. They were just getting computers in. But, so we did work on terminals, but, you know, I still worked a lot on a typewriter. You know, it was really, it had a very front page quality to it. You had these guys who had liquor bottles under their desks and, you know, sort of old grizzled wire service veterans. I was this fresh-eyed kid out of Oxford, you know. They hired me because I studied Arabic and the Iranian Revolution just happened. Wow. And even though it was Persian, Arabic, they thought it was the same squiggles. I would be able to figure them out. And got my start there. Spent a year on Fleet Street at UPI. And then the #2 man in the Beirut Bureau of UPI got shot in the ear by a man robbing a jewelry store on Hamra Street in Beirut. And he said, I want to go home. I do not want to pass go. I do not want to collect $200. I want out of here. I was all of 26 at the time, and they came to me and said, would you like to be the #2 man in the Beirut Bureau of UPI. It was the middle of the Civil War then. This was 1979. Civil War started in 75, 76. And I'd never been to Beirut. And I turned to my wife and said, want to go to Beirut? And she said yes. And suddenly my career as a Middle East correspondent, as a real foreign correspondent, began.
You have this this habit of being lucky your
Yes.
whole career, but I don't believe it's luck. It sounds like you're prepared,
Yeah.
and then you're also willing to go for it and
Right.
put yourself out there.
Well, you know, I was tremendously lucky in that, and luck, of course, in inverted commas, but I spent 2 years in Beirut for UPI, and it was wonderful preparation. And they taught me, you know, really the basics of journalism, because I'd never been to journalism school.
Right.
So I actually got my journalism start in London, if I could just backtrack for a second. So I came over here in 1975. The only journalism course I've ever taken to this day was at St. Louis Park High School outside of Minneapolis, room 313, when I was 15 years old and in 10th grade in high school. I had an amazing journalism teacher. I had that teacher who changes your life in 10th grade, Hattie Steinberg, and her journalism course is the only course I've ever taken, not because I was that good, but because she was that good. And so I worked on my high school paper, did a little in college, and then I came over to London for graduate school. And you know, in those days, actually to this day, you know, the Evening Standard, you know, they'd always have this blaring headline on their newsstand, you know, Brad to Jen, we're finished, or whatever it is. And in 1975, I was walking down the street in London with my then girlfriend, now wife, Anne. And we went by an Evening Standard newsstand, and the blaring headline was, at the time Jimmy Carter was running against Gerald Ford for president. And the blaring headline said, Carter to Jews, if elected, I promise to fire Dr. K. So I stopped my then girlfriend, now wife, and said, look at that headline. Isn't that interesting? Jimmy Carter's running for president, and to win Jewish votes, he's promising to fire the first ever Jewish Secretary of State. And I said, that's really interesting. And I thought about it for a little bit, and I went back to my dorm room, Brian, and I have no idea what possessed me, but I wrote a column about it. And my then girlfriend, now wife, was a neighbor of Gilbert Cranberg, who was then the op-ed page editor of the Des Moines Register, a legendary Midwest paper. And she took it home on vacation, and she gave it to Gil, who, by the way, just passed away last week. And he liked it, and he printed it on the half page of the Des Moines Register with an Outh cartoon, and they paid me $50.
Whew.
And I thought that was the coolest thing in the whole world. I was walking down the street, I had an opinion, I went back and wrote it up, and someone paid me $50. And I was hooked ever after. So during my time in London and at Oxford, I wrote about a dozen op-ed pieces for the Des Moines Register and the Minneapolis Star and Tribune, my own hometown paper. So when I went to apply for a job after college, I applied at AP and UPI. AP looked at my clips and said, kid, you've never covered a fire. You've got all these op-ed pieces, but you've never covered a city hall meeting. And UPI looked at them and said, he's never covered a fire, he's never covered a city hall meeting, but he's written these things, probably means we can teach him how to cover a fire in a city hall meeting. And the Iranian Revolution just happened, and we just lost this person, and they had an opening at $200 a week, $10,500 a year. And Leon Daniel, then the bureau chief for UPI, offered me a job, gave me my start.
Wow.
And so that's how it all happened. So I was lucky there. Then I went to Beirut for 2 years, 79 to 81 for UPI, and then the New York Times offered me a job, brought me back to New York for a year, and they sent me back to Beirut in April 1982. And Israel invaded Lebanon 6 weeks later. And for the next 2 years, it became the biggest story in the world. The Israeli invasion, the Marines coming, the Marines going, the tragic Sabra and Shatila massacre, the blowing up of the American embassy, the blowing up of the Marine compound.
Were you there?
I covered every one of those stories.
What was that like when that kind of explosion goes off and all of those Americans are dead?
Well, I never forget the day the embassy spoke when it was April 13th, I believe, or April 18th, 1983. And I remember the day because the Pulitzer Prizes were going to be announced that night.
Wow.
So it was a Monday. It was the day they announced the Pulitzers. And I knew I'd been nominated by my paper for my coverage of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. And it was 1:06 p.m. and I was in my apartment listening to the BBC 1 o'clock news. And I was listening to it on something that's called a transistor radio. This was a small radio that you could actually put on your desk and get the world news. And I had it on my desk in Beirut, and there was an explosion so powerful, it knocked the radio off my desk. It shook the building that much. And I did what I always did back then. I ran downstairs and looked for A, see if I see smoke anywhere, and B, listen for sirens. Because the Israelis often set off sonic booms over Beirut. So you never knew what was a sonic boom and what was an explosion. And then once you heard the sirens, you knew something was going on. And then I saw a mushroom cloud curling up in the distance. And so I just did that journalism thing. I chased it.
Right.
And
Went straight into it.
Well, yeah, ran toward it. I got closer and closer. I said, I couldn't be, no, it couldn't be. And then I rounded the corner, and there was the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, where I'd spent time over the years seeing different diplomats. It was cut in half like a doll's house. Bodies were hanging, from different floors. There was obviously smoldering, ruin there where the embassy was. And I asked someone, I don't remember who or exactly when, but in the reporting, because there was no perimeter or anything, you just went there and I said, what happened? And they said that a man drove a truck up the front steps of the embassy. Again, there was no perimeter back in those days.
Yeah.
And into the lobby and blew it up. And I'll never forget what I said. I said, you mean he blew himself up? He committed suicide? And that seemed to me just like the most unreal thing, that somebody in the 21st century, or 20th century was committing suicide like that, a kamikaze act. And little did I know that was the first of what would be a form of violence and terrorism that would plague this region and in many ways shape so much of my career in journalism. And so reported that story. The Marine bombing at the embassy, that was on a Sunday morning. That was a little after 6 a.m. in the morning. I was at home sleeping with my wife in our apartment, which is in the heart of Beirut. And that blast was so powerful, it shook us out of bed. And it was miles away out at the airport. And back then, we had a driver, and his day off was Sunday. And we had a stick shift car, and I didn't know how to drive a stick shift. And so it was a Fiat, and my wife knew how to drive a stick. So I rousted her out of bed, got in the car, and we followed a fire engine out to the French and British had a compound together. People forget they also got hit and lost several soldiers. And we were there for a couple hours, and then somebody said, we heard the Marines also took a rocket. That's what I remember them saying. The Marines took a rocket. And I was with Terry Anderson from the AP, who was later abducted and was one of the hostages for a long time, for 5-6 years. And Terry and I said, well, let's go out and see to the airport, see what happened. So we go out to the airport, and there we see the Marine compound completely squashed. And that defined the story there ever after.
Yeah. You mentioned journalism. You just said it about 4 or 5 times in the last 5 minutes. What does it mean to be a journalist?
Well,
especially in today's age.
In today's age, I'm not sure. Back then it was very meat and potatoes. Who, how, what, when, and where. Go with your notebook, write it up, get it first, but get it right. It was pretty straightforward. Back then, I didn't have to tweet, I didn't have to Facebook, I didn't have to blog. I just wrote one story a night for the New York Times on deadline. Occasionally updated it. Occasionally had to dictate stories over a telephone. That were on deadline. But it was right out of the front page. It was just the basic meat and potato stuff. But it was a different time, Brian. In the first week of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon, my apartment was blown up. And my driver's wife and 2 daughters were killed in my apartment. I had to help dig them out. It was one of the worst things that's ever happened to me in my life. And the New York Times wouldn't let me write about it. They said, you're not the story. There's a million people whose apartments have been blown up or suffered casualties. You're not the story. We eventually wrote a small story about it because other people were writing about it, because it was in the first week of the war. today, if that happened, oh my! Today, if you get a little cut on your finger, you Instagram it and send it all over the world. My apartment was blown up, and the New York Times wouldn't let me write about it. So it was a very different era of journalism. By the way, a better one.
A better one. You mentioned Instagram there, and we've seen the rise of social media and news on social media. You've kind of seen that for the past year, 5 years, 10 years. Can you tell me how the wave has come in, and in a certain way now we're seeing people kind of coming back to a trusted source of opinion and news? And maybe explain that for people that might not even understand that.
So I talk the talk of globalization. I actually don't walk the walk. So I don't have a Facebook page. I think we have one defensively because other people are creating phony Facebook pages, for me. I have 847,000 followers on Twitter, but I don't tweet. So the New York Times tweets my column. If you come to me, Brian, say, would you tweet your link to the show? I'll give it to my secretary. She'll do it. I actually do not. If my life depended on putting out a tweet right now, I wouldn't know how to do it.
Okay. Why do you choose to do or not do that?
Because two reasons. One, first, I have the luxury to do that. I have a column in the New York Times. It goes to 20 million people. I don't know how many people it goes to. So I recognize I have the luxury to do that. But there are other reasons. One is my philosophy of life is, and you shall know them by their books, not by their tweets, not by their blogs. So I don't.
Is that a famous quote?
That's what I say. Okay. That's my quote. And you shall know them by their books. So I don't really want to waste my energy doing that. Not really that interested in what people say about me in 142 characters anonymously. Doesn't really interest me. So if you're tweeting about me, you all have a good time. I'm not there. I'm not going to react. And so I find it's a real time suck from what I can see because I don't do it. So I mean, once every blue moon, if something occurs to me, I'll give a tweet to my secretary and she'll put it out. But it's just not something I do. I really can. And one reason is it takes me a long time to figure out my opinion. So if Rex Tillerson is fired on Monday, but my column is until Wednesday, and I tweet something on Monday, right when he's fired, I may feel different about it by Wednesday. Then I'm in this situation where I tweeted this on Monday, but I'm writing my column on Wednesday, and people are going to say, which is you, I mean, I did actually, it's probably the first tweet I've done in a year, but when Tillerson was fired, I did issue a tweet that said, Rex Tillerson was the worst Secretary of State ever, and God, I'm going to miss him. Because he was one of the sane voices there, even though he was so incompetent in many ways as Secretary of State. So anyways, I really focus on my column. That's my currency, and you never debase your currency. That is my currency. That one column a week I have now used to be two, and now I'm down to one. At my choice, and on my books, because I think those are things that last. And spending a lot of time on sort of, I find from what I see of Twitter a little, and again, I don't really look at it, but from what I've seen because now when you read news stories, you see they embed tweets in them. It strikes me as a kind of a giant smart aleck machine, where everyone's competing to be the quippiest smart alecky person. I just don't. I'd rather read a book. I'd rather interview someone, just how I prefer to use my time. So God bless you if it works for you. I'm not on any campaign against them, but this is what works for me. This is how I learn. This is what we're doing right now. I happen to think talking to another person is data. And so that's what I do. I'm kind of an old fart, and I kind of came in this way, and I'm going to go out this way. And if it works for other people, I say, really, God bless you. For me, I really am very old-fashioned,
Okay. And what about news? This concept of where we get our news from, whether it's from Facebook, and whether that news is real or fake or just not researched versus, what we can read in the New York Times. How has the perception of that news changed in the last few years?
Well, I think we're literally at a moment now where it's really changing. So there's this thing called the New York Times. Let's talk about that for a second. And on one side, we had editors. On the other side, we had regulators. In the middle, we had reporters. Okay? And those regulators said, if you want to take out a political ad in the New York Times, you have to identify who you are. I am Brian Rose. I work here. I paid for this ad, okay? And then I can say, Brian Rose, he's left, right, or center, whatever it is, okay? Then over here we had these things called editors, and those editors made sure that what went into the paper was factual as best they could, and if it was incorrect, that it was corrected, okay? Ran a correction. Then along came something called Facebook, let's say, and Facebook said, we're actually not a newspaper. We're a platform. We're something different. We're a platform. And we actually don't need any regulators, and we don't need any editors. Oh, but by the way, you and Mr. New York Times, we'd like all your readers, and we'd like all your advertisers. And by the way, they sucked a lot of our readers and a lot of our advertisers. And that created a real business problem for us and for everybody else. So we looked at Facebook and we said, so you're not a newspaper, you're a platform. How do we actually regulate you? And they said, no, we don't need regulation. Trust us. And because we didn't know how to regulate them, we trusted them. Turns out to have been a huge mistake. They violated our trust, and they are now paying a huge price for it. And they deserve to pay that price because they let us down. Their platform was abused. And it was abused because they're more interested in clicks than facts and the truth. And because facts and the truth require editors and sometimes regulators, and they wanted to avoid both. And so they're paying a price for that now. Now I know that Facebook clearly provides something really valuable to people, because you don't have 2 billion customers around the world unless you're providing something of value. So again, it's not for me, but I recognize that they provide something of real value to people who want to be connected to family, friends, political allies, or whatever. But they need to get their act together. And I hope they're regulated myself. And I'm really counting on the European Union because too many people in our Congress get bought off by some of these tech companies, and I'm counting on the European Union. Their privacy regulations and their, sort of their responsibility regulations. I think they're doing the Lord's work for the world in insisting on calling these people to account and regulating them.
Right, front page on the New York Times last night, on the internet at least, was reporting on this kind of internal turmoil in Facebook and getting rid of someone who might have said or tried to control internally the news and regulate the news and try to check it, and now he's out. He's out, It seems like his whole department's been disbanded, which is quite
Yeah, from what I could read, So, again, it's what I've really noticed was, a couple of years ago, we were mainstream media, we the New York Times, and we were supposedly dead and nearly buried. Not dead and buried, but dead and nearly buried. Okay. Boy, 2 years later, the New York Times is as healthy as ever financially. Our stock price is up 30%, in the last 6 months. And what I find,
electronic platform is successful.
Yeah, electronic. We have more digital subscribers than anybody in the world now, and it's because it turns out a lot of people want trusted news, news they can trust. Not that we don't make mistakes, we do, but when we do, and it's pointed out to us, we try to correct them. And I think people are looking for trusted navigators today more than ever, or at least a certain critical mass of people are, and they're making a very healthy base for The Guardian, for the New York Times, for the Washington Post, and we're, I don't want to say we're cool now, but we're no longer dismissed as some old mainstream media, and now Facebook is really under the gun. Their platform is really being challenged by their users. And how are you using my data? This notion is, oh, I get it. I'm actually your product, and the advertisers are your customers. You're not their customer, you're their product. Yeah. They're actually selling you to that advertiser, your data, your habits, your likes and your dislikes. And by the way, you're like with Google, I'm ready to make that trade. Wow, what I get from Google in terms of search, in terms of directions, in terms of news, in terms of insight, I couldn't live without Google. I could live without Facebook in a second. And I could easily live without Twitter. But so I'm ready to make that trade. I know Google is I can see from the ads, I'm going to the UK and suddenly I get UK ads. Okay, I get that. The computer's following that. I'm actually ready to make that trade. I really feel I'm getting something in return. But I think the others, it's really becoming questionable. Facebook played a clearly important role. How big, whether it was decisive, I don't know in our last election, the way it was abused. And I don't think we'll know fully ever, but we certainly don't know fully yet. First, Mark Zuckerberg said it's kind of crazy to think that Facebook was used that way, and then it was, oops, 128 million people read, some of these fake ads. So they've been incredibly slow to identify how they were exploited and to share that with their users. And so I'm glad they're being called to account by their users. That's really healthy. And we've been through those kind of things before as the New York Times. The readers keep you honest, and they're going to be called for account. So I think they're the cool kids, is kind of worn off a little bit. And maybe you hear a little of the resentment of an old fogey mainstream media guy watching them, be put through this. And there's a little of that, but again, I go back to where I started. Obviously, they provide a lot of value for people. You don't get 2 billion customers without that. So they're going to be here. So let's have the best version of Facebook we're going to have. Yeah. And they're going to go through that. But they're going to have to hire editors. Now, they've hired 3,000 editors, but when you have 2 billion users, it's a drop in the bucket.
Yeah, well said. It would be a shame if I didn't get your opinion on some world affairs.
Sure.
So let me ask you, you've come here into London in the last couple of weeks. It's been an interesting place to be here in the UK.
Yeah.
We've had some, former Soviet nerve agent that we think has been unleashed on a former double agent. We've got obviously the election happening in Russia, diplomats being thrown out on either country, et cetera. Mm-hmm. What do you see, from a distance, and also someone that followed the Cold War for a long time with James Baker and saw maybe the old version of what Russia and the Soviet Union is? What's your take so far on what's happening?
Well, Vladimir Putin strikes me as a guy who is always looking for dignity in all the wrong places. Looking to restore Russia's greatness by telling us he's got a missile now that can penetrate our defenses, and maybe who knows, but kind of when you have to tell people that makes me suspicious. If you really got it, you don't talk about it. He's a guy who's tracking down, old spies and seeking revenge. He's a guy who's saying, I will defend Mother Russia from the West, Meanwhile, the men are dying there at younger and younger ages all the time. A country that has enormous human talent is hemorrhaging it to America and Israel in particular, helping them both become incredible global high-tech giants. Thank you very much for sending us Sergey Brin. He co-founded Google. So in the long run, Putin's only running against Mother Nature, human nature, and Moore's Law, okay? He's running against Mother Nature. He's building his whole country basically on a resource, oil and gas, that the oil part, if we don't keep it in the ground, we're going to end up as a bad biological experiment. Right. He's running against human nature. Europeans look out at the world and they really want what the EU has, much more than what some cockamamie Russia free trade zone has. And he's running against Moore's Law. The speed and power of microchips will keep doubling, and that's going to empower individuals more and more and more to compete, connect, and collaborate globally, as individuals. So I think he's fighting a losing game, but you can do it for a while. It's good work if you can get it. But why did you just have to have an election where you won 72% and you really had no opponent? Like, why did you even bother? So what does that say? Yeah. That you didn't really dare put yourself out there to be truly judged in a free and fair way by your own people. So I think he has got feet of clay, and he can play this game out for a while, as long as oil and gas prices are high. But it's a tragedy he never really wants to drill his people, only the oil and gas. So never really drill his people and unlock their creativity, energy, entrepreneurship, and innovative skills, both men and women. He's always drilling the ground. So I find the whole thing rather pathetic, actually, but it's a good gig for him, and it seems to be working, and it will until it doesn't.
You had an extremely popular column where you used the word code red when you were talking about President Trump. You were also on the news, I think, that evening. Can you talk about what you talked about there? And then can you talk about the Trump-Russia connection, if there is any, and what you're seeing and what we might see play out?
Our president is a disturbed person. I don't know what his exact psychological profile is, but he's a disturbed man. He's also a disgusting human being. So let's just start there. Okay. If you want to know what I really think, I'll tell you afterwards. Okay. He is a disgusting human being.
These are strong words from you, because you've never...
I don't go there usually, but he really merits them. I mean, he's a man that's been found to have issued 2,000 lies and falsehoods in his first year in office. by the Washington Post and by the New York Times. I mean, is there any other word than disgusting for that? Is there any other word than disturbed for that? So we need to call him by his real name. And the column I wrote about was in reaction to the fact that the head of the FBI, NSA, and CIA came out and said, Russia hacked our election in 2016. It is continuing to intervene through social networks in our electoral process now, and it will do so in 2020, in our next big election. And his reaction was no reaction. In fact, the head of the NSA said he has received no instructions to take any extraordinary actions in response to this revelation. So that tells you one of three things, Brian. It tells you Trump is either compromised, that Putin has leverage over him, maybe it's sexual, maybe it's financial, or he's a towering fool, or he actually likes the fact Russia's intervening because he knows they're intervening on his behalf. So it's one of those three. There's no other choice.
And they're all disturbing.
And they're all really disturbing. And that's why I said, this is code red, folks. The biggest threat to our democracy is sitting in the Oval Office.
And what are our next steps?
Well, there's only one thing to do. I don't need any more information about Donald Trump. I know just who he is. My motto is just vote. That is, to all young people, get out of Facebook and into somebody's face. And the way you do that is either run for office yourself, vote for someone who's running for office, raise money for someone who's running for office, drive someone to the polls to vote for someone who's running for office against Trump, or canvass for someone running for office against Trump. What have we learned in the last 6 months? We've learned that the worst Democrat, in my view, is better than the best Republican. Because the best Republicans, Lindsey Graham, the Rob Portmans, Susan Collins, people you said, these are good, decent people. No, they're all in on it now. They all signed on to it. And that tells you the worst Democrat is better than the best Republican. What that tells me is you got to vote for a Democrat. And by the way, I say this, I'm barely a Democrat. I'm a free market guy, very pro-business, very strong on social safety nets. So but I'm a pro-business, progressive, as it were. So I say this as someone who believes unless Democrats get a lever of power, the House, the Senate, the White House, or certainly the House or the Senate, while Trump has the White House, this will go on. So I believe in power, okay? That these guys have the power now and they're just driving it. You look what they're doing on environmental regulations. They're not looking around saying, gosh, I'm really worried what other people will say about this. They just stick it right in your face, okay? And so we need to get power. We, the people who oppose that, and by the way, that includes many liberal, moderate Republicans, and so I'm just focused on one thing, how we get power. I'm not interested in writing another op-ed piece. I don't need any more information about Donald Trump. I know who he is. He's a disturbed person. He's a man who absolutely should never have been elected president of the United States. We can tolerate him for 4 years, maybe, but we cannot tolerate 8 years of him. He will destroy our institutions if we have 8 years. So this is code red for me. And I have no hesitation about saying that. He's an awful human being.
And you said get out of Facebook, and you said
Into somebody's
canvas,
face,
go talk to people.
Absolutely.
This is a human versus human, human on human contact movement.
Right. Because
you can't trust social anyway.
The NRA, the National Rifle Association, they're not in Facebook. They're in your face. They're not in the chat room. They're in the cloakroom of the U.S. Congress with bags of money, and every legislature. Bags of money in one hand and bags of votes in the other. So unless you're there fighting them with the language and the resources, the currency of the day, votes and money, you're going to lose. And so we, the people who oppose this Trump phenomena, and there are many Republicans, I believe, and many Democrats, we need to get the votes and money that will crush him. I think it is really a national imperative that this version of the Republican Party be destroyed. And be destroyed in the only way it can be destroyed, at the polls. Because these people need to go into the corner and sit and look in a mirror and say, what happened to us? How did our party become this sort of syndicate where all we did was rent ourselves out to whoever could energize our base? First it was Rush Limbaugh and talk show hosts, then it was the Tea Party, and then it was Trump. And think what happened in that time. This was a party that said, we are deficit hawks. They said, oh no, now we're deficit doves. This is a party that said, we are free traders. They said, no, now we're protectionists. I mean, there's no core anymore. It's, oh, that's who will re-energize our base, then fine, we'll just be for you. The whole thing is just become a rental party for whoever will energize their base. Because if you energize the base, then I get to keep my $175,000 a year job in the US Congress and my free parking at Reagan National Airport. And that's all these people are interested in. And so that version of the Republican Party needs to be destroyed. The only way it can be destroyed effectively is at the polls. So they are forced to go back and say, what happened to us? We need to go back to being a conservative party. We cannot have a healthy democracy and a two-party system in America if we don't have a proper conservative party. A conservative in terms of family values, not a conservative party that says, oh, you were screwing a porn star while your wife just delivered your second son? I, as an evangelical preacher, no problem. I give you a pass on that. What the hell is that? Yeah. What is that? You know, do they realize how corrupted they've become? And so we need a healthy conservative party, but they aren't conservative. They're actually radical. There are people are telling us that, geez, I went to the doctor, and with my son was sick, and I took him to the doctor, and I took him to 100 doctors, and 99 of those doctors told me this is the cure. And one told me to go home and put tea leaves and witch's brew and grass together and boil it for 2 hours and give it to your son, he'll be fine. What am I talking about? Climate change. 99% of scientists, 99 out of 100 scientists say, this is real, this is coming. You can see it, you know, right before your eyes. Water's coming up in Miami already. Glacier National Park is disappearing. And they're saying, no, we're going to go with the one who says it's a hoax. That's not conservative. That's crazy radical. There's nothing prudent about that. And that's what's happened to this party. They are so off track. And I don't say this because I'm some pro-liberal Democrat. Democrats have their own problems, but they haven't been denying science. They've been making major legislation on health care without hearings. That's not what Democrats are doing. They've been quite responsible in the pursuit of their left of center solutions. So these aren't equal. These people have gone nuts. And Donald, you know, the Republican Party is like a disturbed ecosystem, and Donald Trump is an invasive species. Have you ever seen how many rats you get in a disturbed ecosystem? Some get really fat too.
And that's what's happening.
That's what's happening.
And for a man that's worked very hard on the climate change issue for many, many years, this must be very hard to watch.
Well, it's very hard to watch because, you know, the way I approach it is very hard to watch because this is good business. I mean, you know, basically, this isn't very complicated, all right? This is real. This is coming. It's already here. And it means that the next great global industry is going to be built around clean air, clean water, clean energy, and energy efficiency. It has to be, otherwise we're going to be a bad biological experiment again. You know, so if that's the case, who thinks America can have the world's leading economy if we don't lead in the next great global industry? Please raise your hand. Okay, well, I don't believe that. You know, so you know, what I always say to climate change opponents is that I believe climate change is real. You don't. Okay, well, this is very simple. If climate change comes and I'm right, we're really positioned well. And if I'm wrong, all we have are stronger industries, cleaner industries, which in a world of growing population will be hugely relevant and important. So if I'm wrong that we prepare for climate change and it comes, then we're like a guy who prepares for the Olympic marathon and the Olympics don't come. You're fitter, healthier, trimmer, stronger, you can really run. If we don't prepare and I'm right and it comes, we're a bad biological experiment. So saying I'm going to go that route, that's not conservative. That's crazy radical. And so, the whole thing is nuts. But this is a party that's given up on science. Trump has no science advisor. First president to have no science advisor. I guess because there's no one talking about science on Fox TV, because that seems to be where he gets all his news. So we have no, let me repeat, our president has no science advisor. The Office of Technology and Science in the White House is basically an empty shell.
You spent time with President Obama. You interviewed him. They said he used you as a sounding board. I don't know what that means. What was that experience like? And how does he contrast? Well,
Obama. It was fun talking to Obama because he's a very thoughtful, a well-read person. So it's fun sparring with him, fun interviewing him, fun talking to him, because there's a real mind, at work there. And so, and we hit each other with our purses plenty. There were things he did I didn't agree with, things that had to do with Syria, things that had to do with Simpson Bowles, whatnot. There were that economic package that I disagreed with. But Donald Trump had more scandals this week, and I think it's only Tuesday, than Obama had in 8 years, okay? And so he represented America in a dignified way. His family behaved with the greatest decorum. His wife was a enormously decent and popular first lady. And the president, this guy is just a indecent human being, Trump. And he can't finish a sentence properly, so talking to him isn't particularly satisfying. And the only scoop news he makes when people interview him, you may have noticed, is he says something outrageous. It's not because he comes up with something like really brilliant and interesting. It's like
it's clickbait news.
It's just clickbait. That's all it is. So I have no sources in this administration. They don't talk to me. I'm not banging the door to talk to them. I just want to survive them. We got, sort of 2.5 more years to go.
Okay. Let me ask you about a couple other places around the world. North Korea, what's your take on what's happening there now?
The thing I always say about North Korea is that it's a dynasty, a 3-generation-old dynasty. Kim Jong-un is the third of the Kim dynasty. And what does that tell you? It tells you they're not suicidal. They're homicidal. But they're not suicidal, because you don't survive 3 generations. So that means we have something to talk about. These nuclear bombs they're developing, they're all health insurance for them, for the regime, And I don't think they're going to go to zero under any conditions. And maybe Trump can get them down, stop their long-range testing so they can't hit us. I mean, there's a lot of things that he can do. I'm happy if he sits down with them. I don't think that's a bad idea. I think actually Trump has done a pretty good job of scaring him a little bit, because it takes being a little crazy sometimes to penetrate a guy like that. And Trump can do crazy really well. And so I doubt much is going to come from it. But at the end of the day, what Trump, I think, doesn't fully realize is that you got 3 choices with North Korea, just as Obama had 3 choices with Iran. You can acquiesce, don't want to do that. You can bomb, well, really don't want to do that. Or you can negotiate. Guess we got to do that. So Obama did it with Iran. And what Trump will discover very soon is that the best he can get out of North Korea is to duplicate what Obama did with Iran. That's the best he's going to get, because they're not going to go to zero. And that's going to be interesting to watch as he comes up against that reality.
You said recently that there is nothing but butter between Tehran and Tel Aviv. First of all, how do you come up with these amazing phrases? And then second of all, what does that mean? But how do you come up with those? Because everyone stops and tries to think about what Thomas just said. Yeah. I mean, in a weird way, in a nice way, it's clickbait yourself, because it gets people to maybe pay attention to something that a long-winded expression wouldn't get. Well,
I do see myself as my job as being a translator from English to English. That's really what I try to do. I try to take complex situations, the geopolitics of Iran and the Arab world, and explain it, first of all, to myself in a way I can understand, and then share it with readers. Because my form of idealism, of my journalism, is I believe in something Marie Curie once said, which is, now is the time to understand more so we may fear less. And in an age of real complexity, like helping people understand the world so they fear less and are less vulnerable to people like a Trump or a Putin or an Erdogan, who will, try to take them places because they can't understand, I think it's really important for all of us in this business. So that's really my form of journalism. Where these phrases, usually, jet lag.
Yeah.
Where they come from inside. I have no idea. It's chemical, and God bless me with this, and that's on my mind.
It comes from Minnesota somewhere.
It comes from somewhere, I don't know. And what I was trying to say is that basically the collapse of the Sunni Arab world, which we've witnessed over the last 15 years, has meant that there's really no power between Tehran and Tel Aviv, and it's all just fragmented power. And therefore, even if the Shah of Iran were in power today, he'd probably be projecting himself to the West because there's nothing there. And so Iran and Syria are just getting closer and closer together. Iran and Israel are getting closer and closer together. Okay. And that's going to be a real challenge.
Okay, closer and closer to having a conflict.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And you talked about that conflict could be something we're not expecting, as in, submarines and...
Yeah, I think that I think both sides really want to avoid a war. Iran does not need a war with Israel right now. It would be very devastating because the Israelis would hit the Iranian state. They're not going to the Israelis would make sure that war just isn't confined to the Golan Heights, And the Iranian proxies in Lebanon, Hezbollah, don't want there to be a war because the Israelis have made it clear, you will not out-crazy us. Do not think you're going to out-crazy us. So we will actually devastate your civilian areas of your civilian supporters, as we did in 2006, the last time we ran around, or this time it'll be much worse.
Right.
And don't tell me about Geneva, The Hague, war crimes. Not interested, Just telling you, you will not out-crazy us. So this will be a devastating war when and if it happens, and hopefully it's if not when.
Right, and that's bad for business for Hezbollah because, they're in the business.
And they're in the business of power and control,
Yeah.
and they don't want to be devastated by the Israelis, but the Israelis are in the business of high tech. And between Haifa and Tel Aviv, you have one high tech company after another on that highway. So it wouldn't take but half a dozen rockets to do great damage, to Israel's high tech industry.